Welcome to Oradour Village, June 1944. A place frozen in time, streets, empty houses shattered, yet the echoes of children's laughter pierced the silence as if nothing had ever happened. Do you hear it, soft and fleeting, impossible to pin down, slipping through the ruins like a memory refusing to die? Shadows move across walls that once held life movement, where there is no one, a glimpse of tiny feet vanishing before your eyes, a fleeting impression of games no one can remember. Official records report the fate unknown, hundreds disappeared, letters and toys left behind, scattered, their owners never returning. Yet some insist they hear the children still running, playing, whispering their voices, threading through the cracks in the stones, brushing past your ears, carrying secrets no one should know. The air itself seems to tremble with a presence unseen, a reminder that time does not erase everything that echoes, survive where flesh and bone have vanished. Can a sound endure when its source is gone? Can laughter linger when it has no one to belong to? Before we begin, leave a comment where you're listening from and the exact time. Share the moment you felt history breathe, the instant when reality and memory collide. Some visitors describe a chill, others a fleeting warmth, as if the village itself remembers what humans try to forget. The ruins tell stories in whispers, in fragments of paper, in shards of toys, every object a testament to lives interrupted, to innocence lost but never silenced. And yet, beyond the documentation, beyond the official reports, there is something more, something that defies logic, something that haunts even the most rational mind. Children's laughter and whispers move through the empty streets, threading through the ruins, hinting at games that never ended, at voices that refused to vanish. What you are about to hear defies reason, yet every scrap of evidence, every witness, every shadow insists it is real. The village does not forget, the echoes do not fade, and you will feel it right here, right now, as Oradour whispers to you, carrying the voices of those who never returned. The ruins stand silent yet alive, haunted by memory, shadowed by presence, and the laughter of children endures, impossible to forget. Impossible to silence, impossible to explain. June 1944. Oradour-sur-Glane, France. The village sat quietly on the rolling hills of Limousin, cobbled streets, winding between stone houses, smoke drifting from chimneys, the scent of summer fields carried by a gentle breeze. Farmers tended to livestock. Children ran through the lanes, their laughter weaving through the air like a melody. Women hung laundry, men repaired carts, life moved in ordinary rhythms, ordinary routines. A small village tucked away from the war raging beyond its borders. Soldiers passed through nearby roads, distant gunfire, and the occasional airplane overhead. Yet the village seemed untouched, serene, a pocket of calm amidst chaos, or so it appeared. The records tell us who lived here. Families with names repeated over generations, fathers and mothers, children, and elders, all woven into the fabric of the community. Jeanne, age 9, often chased her younger brother Pierre through the square, past the bakery and the church, their games echoing off the stone walls. Monsieur Lambert repaired carts along the street, whistling tunes that mixed with the sound of the wind in the trees. Every face, every gesture recorded in the memories of survivors and neighbors. Time moved slowly, measured by the rising sun and the setting light, by the churning of the river just beyond the village, by the rhythm of daily life. Yet beneath the surface, tensions existed. The war had reached every corner of France. Resistance fighters moved cautiously through the forests, whispers of sabotage and intelligence passed from one village to another. German patrols made their presence known, checkpoints along the roads. Vehicles rolling past the occasional bark of orders shouted through megaphones, boots on cobblestones echoing down narrow alleys. Oradour-sur-Glane was not immune, even if its residents hoped to remain unnoticed. Letters carried instructions, rumors, and warnings. One man in the village, Pierre Fournier, noted in his journal, the unease, the sense that something unseen lingered at the edges of daily life, that the village's peace was fragile, delicate as glass ready to shatter. Maps and official communications placed Oradour on the path of German occupation, a waypoint along routes connecting strategic towns. Local authorities recorded troop movements, noting that a convoy would pass through the area around mid-June. The village, for all its quiet and order, found itself mapped in cold ink, traced on charts for purposes its residents could not foresee. Archivists later described these maps as silent witnesses, documents of a destiny no one in the village had asked for, yet one that would arrive without warning. Letters sent to nearby towns hinted at the uncertainty, the singularity of Oradour's position, a crossroads between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between life as usual and life interrupted. Eyewitness accounts from neighboring villages speak of the day in fragments, moments recorded and remembered differently by each observer. One man remembered seeing the German convoy approach a procession of trucks and soldiers, sunlight glinting on helmets, boots, stamping dust into the road. Another noted the silence before it arrived, a village frozen in anticipation, children still playing, unaware of the shadow approaching. Time seemed to bend, minutes stretching and compressing ordinary life, colliding with the machinery of war, producing a tension that would later be described as palpable, almost living. The church, the central square, the bakeries, every familiar landmark became markers of memory later to be contrasted against the ruins they would become. Residents went about routines that in hindsight seem surreal. Washing clothes, fetching water, laughing, arguing, unaware of the gravity pressing from the horizon. Maps, orders, and patrol schedules all converged on Oradour-sur-Glane, yet in the moments leading to what historians would call a tragedy, the village appeared untouched, a bubble of continuity in a world unraveling. Beyond official records, letters, and diaries reveal the texture of ordinary life, the minutiae that history often overlooks. A note from Jean's mother mentions her daughter's hat misplaced during play, a recipe for bread, the arrangement of flowers on the church altar. A baker's ledger records loaves sold, the precise times of deliveries, the names of those who came for bread. The smallest details forming a lattice of life that would soon be ruptured. These records, mundane at first glance, take on the weight of prophecy, documenting moments before catastrophe, with a clarity that survives time. Soldiers' reports, meticulous and cold, describe the village in terms of strategy and positioning, noting streets, buildings, potential obstacles, human density. Observers decades later remark on the dissonance between the warmth of the village in personal accounts and the clinical description in military logs. The juxtaposition highlights the intersection of everyday life with forces indifferent to it, the fragility of peace when history imposes itself. Sounds defined the atmosphere: children's laughter, the clatter of carts, birds in the trees, the river murmuring a distant hammer on metal. Each sound carries a weight, a memory, a thread connecting the present to the moments before disaster. Survivors later recount the vividness of these sounds, how they lingered, how the memory of them contrasts sharply with the silence that followed. The air, it seems, remembered the rhythm of ordinary life, preserving it even as the physical forms that created it vanished. The village square, so familiar to those who lived there, becomes a stage in hindsight. Every corner, every wall, every doorway. A participant in history. Photographs, taken by outsiders years later, show buildings intact, streets clear, people moving in ordinary ways. Yet archival analysis, cross-referencing diaries, letters, and military documents reveals the tension threading beneath every frame. The juxtaposition of normalcy and foreboding creates an uneasy sense that what was about to unfold was encoded in the mundane, visible only to those prepared to read between the lines. Every family, every household, every individual experienced Oradour-sur-Glane uniquely, yet collectively their lives were interwoven with threads of ordinary routine, innocence, and community. Maps, letters, patrol schedules, diaries all converge to paint a portrait of life on the cusp of irreversible change. The context, meticulously documented, provides not only location and time but atmosphere, sound, and texture, creating a foundation for understanding the unfolding events. June 1944, Oradour-sur-Glane, a village alive in ordinary ways, yet shadowed by history, poised at the threshold of the extraordinary. Official records and archival documents describe Oradour-sur-Glane in meticulous detail. The village, situated in the heart of Limousin, contained narrow streets, stone houses with wooden shutters, a small church with a bell tower visible from every corner, and workshops where local craftsmen plied their trades. Military reports note the approach of a German convoy in mid-June, trucks rolling down the main road, soldiers observing every corner, mapping the village's layout, identifying strategic points, calculating response times. The documentation emphasizes the precise positioning of buildings, the width of streets, the potential for concealment, and the density of inhabitants. Historians later cross-referenced these reports with survivor testimonies, revealing both alignment and discrepancy. Witness accounts collected decades later describe the morning of June 10, 1944, in fragments each observer offering a unique lens. One resident recalled children chasing one another through the square, their laughter cutting through the warm morning air, while elders discussed mundane village matters near the fountain. Soldiers passed by vehicles glinting in the sun, their boots stamping against the cobblestones. Another account speaks of a sudden silence and almost imperceptible shift in atmosphere, as if the air itself anticipated the coming disruption. Details align in some places and contradict in others. A mother describes her daughter's playful cries. Another survivor insists the streets were momentarily empty, shadows moving without explanation. These conflicting narratives form a tapestry of uncertainty, a mixture of factual events and human perception filtered through fear, trauma, and memory. Letters from villagers preserved in local archives provide insight into ordinary life before catastrophe. One letter mentions the timing of morning chores, the placement of vegetables in the garden, the daily routines that anchored community life. Another details the bakery schedule, bread being portioned for families, names of children collecting loaves before school. These seemingly trivial details are invaluable, creating a vivid picture of daily rhythm, illustrating the lives that would soon be interrupted, the innocents at risk. The letters reveal a community conscious of the surrounding war, yet clinging to normalcy, negotiating survival in ways both subtle and practical. Military documentation contrasts sharply with personal accounts. German orders for the convoy describe precise objectives to gather residents, inspect dwellings, and execute measures considered necessary by command. The language is clinical, stripped of emotion, focusing on logistics and efficiency, emphasizing speed and control. The stark contrast between the warmth of letters and diaries and the cold efficiency of military orders underlines the dissonance between lived experience and historical machinery. Cross-referencing these sources uncovers inconsistencies. Some residents report hearing laughter. Others only the hum of engines, yet maps and patrol logs provide fixed positions, times, and routes, leaving historians to reconcile human memory with bureaucratic precision. Eyewitness testimony also captures minute sensory details that official records omit. The sound of leather boots against stone, the flutter of shutters, the faint clatter of pottery in the square, the rustle of clothing as children ran. These elements, minor yet persistent, serve as anchors in memory, allowing later researchers to reconstruct sequences of movement, the juxtaposition of life and impending threat, and the psychological state of villagers as events unfolded. Certain objects are repeatedly noted: a small wooden horse, a handkerchief embroidered with initials, a bell that rang too early in the morning. Each artifact, preserved in photographs or survivor recollection, becomes evidence of continuity and disruption, tangible proof of life interrupted. Newspaper reports from the period, though constrained by censorship and wartime propaganda, offer corroboration of troop movements, convoy arrivals, and strategic objectives. Headlines are factual and sparse, emphasizing occupied villages or security operations, omitting the human dimension, yet providing fixed points in time that anchor personal testimonies. Diaries from local officials complement these accounts, noting the precise hours when German forces were observed entering the vicinity, the reactions of civilians, and the tension palpable in the streets. Together, these sources create a framework for understanding both the mechanical and human components of what was to occur. Photographic evidence taken post-event adds another layer to factual understanding. Images of stone facades, shuttered windows, empty streets, scattered debris, and abandoned belongings show the immediate aftermath. Researchers examine angles, shadows, and object placement, cross-referencing with survivor narratives and military logs. Even in absence of living witnesses in photographs, the village communicates through its remains, the distribution of items, the destruction pattern, the traces of hurried movement. Each frame serves as a silent witness, confirming some accounts while raising questions about others, presenting both clarity and ambiguity. Certain diaries and oral histories highlight discrepancies that remain unresolved. A woman recounts seeing children playing near the church minutes before soldiers arrived. Another recalls being confined indoors, unaware of the laughter. These contradictions are preserved in archives representing the fragmented nature of lived experience. The repetition of themes, children's play, fleeting joy, sudden disruption forms a pattern that echoes throughout documentation, reinforcing the village's innocence, the fragile rhythms of ordinary life, and the shock of sudden intervention. Tangible evidence aligns with intangible memory. Fragments of letters, partially burned books, household items left in place, toys abandoned mid-game, all indicate a sudden halt to life. Official reports note numbers, schedules, and instructions, while survivor accounts breathe life into those numbers, names, faces, expressions, gestures. Every shred of evidence underscores the reality of human presence, the ordinary life that once existed, and the extraordinary event that would permanently mark the village. Analysis of the fact layer exposes not only what happened, but also how it was recorded, preserved, and interpreted. Cross-examination of multiple sources reveals the interplay of memory trauma and documentation. Human perception interacts with bureaucratic recording, producing a layered understanding that is neither purely objective nor purely subjective. Researchers confront the challenge of reconciling the warmth of life, the vibrancy of children's laughter, and the cold mechanisms of military operations that converged on Oradour-sur-Glane. Even decades later, scholars emphasize the importance of this fact layer. Every report, letter, photograph, and diary entry forms a lattice through which the past can be understood. The meticulous recording of everyday life combined with official documentation and survivor testimony provides both anchor points and mystery, a framework upon which folklore, rumor, and haunting memory would later be layered. These facts, verified yet incomplete, form the foundation for understanding the village's story, for piecing together the ordinary, the extraordinary, and the inexplicable. Whispers linger in Oradour-sur-Glane long after the streets fell silent. Locals speak of sounds carried on the wind, laughter that threads through the ruins, as if the children never left, tiny footsteps, pattering across broken stone, fleeting glimpses of movement where none should exist. Some claim to see shadows darting between the remnants of houses, figures too small to be soldiers, too quick to be imagined, disappearing before any observer can focus. The air itself seems charged with presence, a resonance of past life, echoing through the empty streets. Even decades later, visitors describe chills running up their spines, hairs standing on end, the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, the faint brush of fingers along their arms, a reminder that memory persists where flesh and bone no longer tread. Old wives' tales and village superstition mingle with these accounts, giving rise to folklore that overlays the factual record. Children's laughter is said to carry warnings presaging misfortune or danger, a protective echo of innocence lost. The church bell is claimed to toll on its own marking hours when no clock strikes its tone, carrying across the square a spectral signal, a reminder of what once was. Farmers speak of livestock behaving strangely, refusing to enter certain pastures, shying from ruins where no human foot has tread for decades, as though sensing the residue of fear and play mingled. Each story, each observation becomes a thread in the tapestry of legend, embellishing the tangible with the ethereal, transforming ruins into living memory, a village that refuses to remain silent. Ghost tales proliferate in subtle ways. One story describes a young girl cap askew running along the main street, vanishing beneath a collapsed doorway, leaving only a trace of laughter in the air. Another recounts a boy holding a wooden horse, spinning in circles, calling to unseen companions, until the figure dissolves into shadow, leaving only the toy on the cobbles. Older villagers insist these are not hallucinations or exaggerations, but remnants of a past that cannot be fully reconciled with the present. The spectral presence is often accompanied by ordinary sounds, wind rattling shutters, birds taking flight, the distant rush of the river. But blended together, they form an unearthly melody, a chorus of life that has not been extinguished. Stories of spectral children circulate among those who study Oradour, historians and folklorists alike. One account details the experience of a visitor who paused in the central square, hearing the echo of small feet running past, laughter echoing off ruined walls only to turn and find nothing. Another describes a woman feeling a child's hand in hers, warm and fleeting, guiding her along the path and then gone. Such experiences are reported again and again, forming patterns of interaction, recurring motifs that suggest a presence persistent enough to be recognized, yet intangible, never fully graspable. The folklore layer takes root in these repetitions, the cumulative effect of multiple observers lending credence to the haunting narrative without confirming its physical reality. Oral traditions preserve additional layers of the story. Grandparents tell of neighbors who vanished silently, of children whose games were abruptly interrupted, of adults who swore they heard the laughter long after their own children had left the village. Superstitions grew around certain corners, particular ruins where whispers seemed concentrated, where shadows were densest. Villagers avoided these places at night, telling younger generations that misfortune clung there not as punishment, but as remembrance, as if the echoes of the past demanded acknowledgement. Songs and rhymes sung to children reference the village, the laughter, the play, embedding memory into cultural transmission, ensuring that even those born decades later carry traces of the spectral presence in their imaginations. These stories also reflect human attempts to process trauma. The blending of observed phenomena with supernatural explanation allows the community to navigate grief, loss, and incomprehension. Children's laughter becomes a symbol of what was stolen, of innocence disrupted. Shadows are interpreted as guardians or reminders rather than threats. Folklore here functions as a coping mechanism, a narrative scaffolding, allowing ordinary life to contend with extraordinary violence, a bridge between factual record and emotional truth. Visitors' experiences further contribute to the legend. Researchers note patterns, sudden drops in temperature in specific locations, unexplained movements in peripheral vision, fleeting sounds not captured by recording devices, and the sensation of being accompanied by unseen presences. These details, while anecdotal, reinforce local superstition, solidifying the folklore. Tourists describe chills and tingling sensations along the spine, the sense of being observed, the awareness of invisible playmates among the ruins, small hands brushing past their own. The persistence of such reports across generations creates a compounding effect, each retelling reinforcing the village's haunted reputation. Even architectural features contribute to the lore. Narrow alleys, collapsed roofs, and fractured walls serve as stages for imagined interactions, allowing shadows to play across the observer's mind, in patterns reminiscent of children at play. The interplay of light and decay produces movement, where there is none, contributing to the perception of a living past. Ruins become a theater, a dynamic space in which folklore thrives, bridging tangible evidence with experiential mystery. The folklore also encompasses items left behind. Toys, letters, and clothing remnants are imbued with significance beyond their materiality. A doll on a windowsill, a wooden horse near a doorway, a scarf hanging from a nail, all become conduits of narrative focal points for spectral imagination. Observers report sensations or visual anomalies in proximity to these objects, suggesting that memory and material combine to animate the stories, giving shape to intangible echoes of life. As decades passed, the legend of Oradour-sur-Glaine's children's laughter and whispers evolved, merging with historical record to create a dual narrative. One narrative anchored in fact, the other in perception, superstition, and cultural memory. The two intertwine, producing a village that exists simultaneously in history and in myth, where shadows and sounds insist upon being acknowledged, where laughter is never fully silenced, and where the ordinary and the extraordinary coexist inseparable in memory and imagination. Oral histories and folklore ensure that the past maintains presence. Children's laughter and whispers are not merely echoes, but voices of continuity, asserting life amidst destruction, a reminder that ordinary joy can resist erasure. Shadows become actors in ongoing play, not malevolent spirits, but remnants of a world interrupted. The folklore layer, rich and persistent, transforms the ruins into a living archive, a space where history is remembered emotionally as well as intellectually, where sound and sight, memory and imagination coalesce into haunting resonance. Through these accounts, the village achieves a form of immortality. The laughter and whispers persist in the imagination of those who visit, those who study, and those who recount the stories to new generations. Folklore intertwines with fact, each reinforcing the other, creating a narrative of life, interrupted yet unextinguished, a tale where children continue to play, to laugh, to whisper across decades and across the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane. Oradour-sur-Glane, though destroyed, became a nexus of symbols, gestures, and memories that transcend the ordinary. Streets' fractured walls crumbled, yet certain objects persisted, holding within them the weight of human presence. A small wooden horse, scuffed and weathered, rested near the square where children once ran its worn edges, a testament to play interrupted. Letters frayed and ink faded still whispered stories of daily life, of small joys, of mundane concerns, abruptly silenced. These items, ordinary in isolation, collectively formed a tapestry that spoke louder than words, a silent archive of lives lived, of existence, asserted against the inevitability of disappearance. Scholars examining Oradour have noted patterns in the material culture left behind. The positioning of objects, the remnants of meals, the arrangement of personal belongings. Even the deliberate placement of doors and shutters suggest behaviors, intentions, and rituals frozen in time. Every fragment is a symbol, a node connecting past and present. The small church, its altar cracked but intact, becomes not only a religious center, but a repository of hope and memory. Candles burned for moments in the past still seem to flicker in imagination, their light reflected in the eyes of visitors, evoking wonder, reverence, and dread simultaneously. The bridge between ideology, technology, and politics manifests in the tension between everyday life and wartime mechanisms. German military precision, the cold calculus of occupation, intersected with human routines, producing a narrative both mechanical and intensely personal. Patrols recorded movement, convoys followed strict timetables, orders dictated interactions, and yet children played, merchants sold bread, mothers prepared meals. The juxtaposition of calculated authority and unstructured human activity highlights a fundamental motif: life persisted even under the shadow of control. This interplay becomes symbolically rich, demonstrating resilience, resistance, and the persistence of ordinary humanity amidst structured oppression. Key symbols emerge from these intersections. The wooden horse is more than a toy. It embodies continuity, the persistence of innocence, and the fragility of memory. A torn piece of embroidery recovered decades later evokes domesticity and care, the intimate details of life abruptly interrupted. Even a displaced loaf of bread, partially eaten and left on a stone ledge, becomes emblematic, a marker of ordinary rhythms frozen by extraordinary events. These objects serve as nodes connecting individuals to collective memory, transforming mundane artifacts into repositories of ideological, cultural, and emotional significance. Political context reinforces the symbolic weight of Oradour. Orders delivered through maps and coded messages dictated the trajectory of military operations. Yet these cold abstractions collided with human realities. Civilians unaware of the precise calculations governing troop movements nonetheless enacted daily routines that intersected with strategy in unpredictable ways. The incongruity between the human and the bureaucratic underscores the tragic resonance of the village, amplifying the symbolic density of each object and gesture preserved in memory and ruins. Technology, both destructive and preservative, plays a critical role. Vehicles, weapons, and communications facilitated the enforcement of orders, yet the very same mechanisms inadvertently documented the event. Photographs, maps, and journals capture both the mundane and the extraordinary, freezing moments in time that allow researchers to analyze sequence, behavior, and consequence. The interaction between human agency and technological apparatus produces motifs repeated across historical contexts: destruction, memory, resilience, and trace. Each artifact, each document becomes part of a narrative network linking objects, events, and perception into a coherent, though haunting story. Every corner of the village contributes to this web of meaning. Alleyways once alive with children's games now harbor shadows, their angles framing objects in ways that accentuate absence and presence simultaneously. The bakery's oven, cold and silent, speaks of nourishment and care abruptly halted. Shutters left ajar suggest departure, interruption, or anticipation. Patterns emerge not in chaos, but in the silent alignment of remnants, each reinforcing the others, producing an archive both material and symbolic. The village itself functions as a multi-layered manuscript, its walls and stones inscribed with stories of ordinary life subjected to extraordinary forces. Visitors guided by these symbols experience an interweaving of perception and cognition. A small horse on a stone ledge evokes both joy and sorrow, laughter remembered and silence imposed. Fragments of letters partially legible suggest intentions, routines, and affections, while gaps underscore absence, mystery, and loss. The interplay between what is known, what is observed, and what is inferred forms a narrative bridge connecting the tangible past to the intangible layers of memory, emotion, and cultural resonance. In analyzing Oradour, it becomes evident that the village's artifacts, its ruins, and its documented records function together to form a symbolic system. Every object, every trace, every corner is a node in a network that conveys ideological, technological, political, and human meaning. The juxtaposition of life and disruption, of routine and extraordinary intervention, produces motifs that resonate across time: innocence, preserved humanity, interrupted memory, haunting the present. Thus the sword and the scroll converge. The former represents structured authority, military power, and technological enforcement. The latter embodies human experience, domesticity, and memory. Together they frame Oradour not merely as a site of destruction, but as a symbolic landscape where objects, gestures, and traces articulate a narrative of ordinary life disrupted by extraordinary forces, where the echoes of children's laughter continue to haunt the ruins, and where history and memory intersect in tangible, evocative ways. The morning began like any other. Yet in hindsight, every ordinary moment carried the weight of inevitability. Children played along the narrow streets, their laughter echoing off stone walls, their tiny feet scuffing cobblestones polished by generations of village life. Mothers hung laundry in the sun, the scent of bread wafting from the bakeries, fathers tending livestock, sharpening tools, exchanging brief greetings. Shadows stretched in the early light, bending with the movement of trees, blending with the silhouettes of children running, carrying their small wooden toys, a simple horse or a doll, oblivious to what approached. The convoy arrived suddenly, rolling down the main street with mechanical precision. Soldiers disembarked, boots striking the stone, voices calling in commands that cut through the air like blades. The ordinary rhythm of life shattered instantly, replaced by the ordered efficiency of occupation. Witnesses later described a surreal juxtaposition: the bright sunlight, the sound of laughter fading into abrupt silence, children frozen mid-step, parents reacting in disbelief, the noise of vehicles overwhelming human conversation. One resident remembered seeing her brother holding a loaf of bread, its edges still warm from the oven. And then the figure disappeared, leaving only memory and shadow. Inside the church, families sought shelter, huddling together, unaware of the precise mechanisms of enforcement waiting outside. The bell, silent for centuries, rang only in memory, its chime replaced by distant shouts, metallic clicks, and sudden steps on wooden floors. Diaries recovered later speak of the moments in fragments, incomplete yet vivid: a mother's hand clasping a child, a gaze toward the street, the sound of a shutter closing abruptly, a letter dropped, partially written, now illegible. Every minute was amplified, stretched, compressed as ordinary life collided violently with military procedure, producing an experience both immediate and impossible to forget. Objects became witnesses. A small wooden horse lay abandoned on the stone floor, scuffed and marked, the surface worn from years of play, its placement frozen mid-incident. Letters crumpled and partially charred carried messages never delivered, routines never completed. A scarf caught on a broken nail fluttering in the breeze, a visual echo of absence and presence. Each artifact recorded a human narrative in the silence of abandonment, a testimony of interrupted lives, traces of laughter now hauntingly absent. Voices conflicted in memory. Some survivors recount hearing the children cry. Others insist they remember only the echo of laughter, incongruous against the violence they could not yet comprehend. Fragments of testimony reveal contradictions. One man recalls seeing a child darting through a doorway only to vanish. Another insists that the same street was empty moments later. The inconsistency underscores the nature of trauma. The mind's attempt to reconcile ordinary life with extraordinary disruption. Every sound, every shadow, every object becomes imbued with significance, each a node in a complex web of fact, memory, and interpretation. Time itself seemed fractured. Minutes elongated and contracted, the ordinary cadence of life replaced by a rhythm dictated by fear, movement, and response. Footsteps echo on stone, shouts cut through air once filled with chatter. Dust rises from the ground, disturbed by sudden movement, carried by wind that whispers through fractured walls. Diaries note the precise hours, yet these measurements fail to capture the experiential reality. the psychological compression of life interrupted. Joy extinguished and silence imposed. Even after the events concluded, the village retained its voice through the remains. Toys, letters, clothing, and debris persisted as testimony, each element anchoring memory. Later visitors sensed the echo of laughter, and whispers felt the brush of absence, experienced the shadows of presence. The climax is not only the act of disruption itself, but the reverberation, the imprint of human life abruptly halted, yet persisting in objects, in memory, in perception. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, every detail magnified, every artifact imbued with the weight of lost continuity. The village, frozen in this moment, functions as both stage and witness. Life persists in absence, memory persists in silence, and the shadows of children endure as spectral reminders. The ordinary routines of June 1944 collide with military precision, leaving behind evidence both tangible and ephemeral. Objects, witnesses, and memories converge to form a singular experience, a climax of disruption, loss, and haunting resonance. Every corner of Oradour-sur-Glane tells this story, inscribed in stone and wood, in paper and memory, echoing through time as children's laughter and whispers continue to haunt the ruins. The ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane remain as they were left: streets, frozen walls, fractured windows, staring blankly into the sky. Yet the village speaks still. Children's laughter threads through the emptiness, faint but persistent whispering along the cobblestones, brushing past the remnants of toys, letters, and personal belongings abandoned decades ago. Shadows of play linger in doorways, around corners, across collapsed roofs, impossible to capture, impossible to hold, yet unmistakable to those who listen closely. Every stone, every fragment, every object resonates with memory, a testimony to lives interrupted but never forgotten. Visitors tread carefully, aware that they are walking through more than ruins. They are moving through the intersection of history and legend, where ordinary life and extraordinary violence converge. The air feels charged with presence, the wind carrying fragments of sound, echoes of joy mingled with fear, a delicate balance between memory and imagination. Photographs cannot fully convey what is sensed in the quiet. The small movements at the edge of vision, the inexplicable feeling of being observed by a past that persists unyielding. Oradour's story does not conclude with documentation or memorialization. It extends into perception, into stories retold by those who survived, by those who study, by those who walk the village centuries later. Oral histories, songs, and whispered accounts preserve the traces of children's voices. The pattern of daily life abruptly halted the gestures of ordinary people caught between continuity and catastrophe. The folklore layer persists alongside the factual record, entwining memory and imagination, evidence and sensation, creating a narrative that is both anchored and elusive. Even as the decades pass, the village's presence remains immediate. Light falls through shattered windows in patterns that suggest movement, shadows shifting as if play continues unseen. Toys left on floors, a small wooden horse, fragments of embroidered cloth. Items ordinary yet charged with significance become vessels of continuity, symbols of human resilience and the persistence of memory. Visitors report chills, tingling sensations, the faintest sound of laughter, or whisper moments that defy explanation, but reinforce the dual narrative of fact and folklore that defines Oradour. History and legend intertwine in a delicate dance. Facts document troop movements, orders, numbers, and structures, while folklore imbues those same facts with life, with emotion, with haunting resonance. The village, though silent in terms of living presence, vibrates with the echoes of the ordinary, interrupted a chorus of joy, fear, and memory that transcends the physical ruins. The children's laughter and whispers continue to assert themselves, bridging decades, reminding all who enter that life, even when violently interrupted, leaves traces that endure. Oradour-sur-Glane stands as a testament, a symbol, a reminder that memory can persist where flesh and bone are no longer present, that objects can speak across generations, that shadows can carry stories. Every corner, every stone, every abandoned toy is a page in an open-ended narrative, a story without closure, a reminder that history is both preserved and haunted. You have just heard another file from Shadow Stories. If you want to uncover more, to follow the echoes of forgotten places, to listen to lives that linger long after disappearance, subscribe and keep their voices alive. Oradour survives not in walls alone, but in memory, in imagination, in the persistent traces of laughter and whispers that haunt the ruins.